Cari Farver was just a young woman living an ordinary life in Oregon. But behind her screens, a terrifying obsession was growing. One that would turn her world upside down and leave a quiet town haunted forever. Cari Farver was a young woman in her late 20s living in a quiet suburban town in Oregon, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name and streets were lined with maple trees that turned golden in the fall. Cari had always stood out in the crowd, not for being loud or dramatic, but for the way she carried herself, confident, warm, and meticulously organized. She had carved a niche for herself as a social media manager for a small marketing firm, a job that suited her perfectly. She loved curating content, analyzing trends, and keeping up with the ever-changing digital world. Friends often joked that she knew more about social media than the platforms themselves. Her life followed a predictable rhythm. Each morning, she went for a jog along the neighborhood paths, her headphones in, listening to music or the occasional podcast. She returned home, showered, and headed to work, where she immersed herself in campaigns, deadlines, and client meetings. In the evenings, she liked the quiet comfort of her apartment, catching up on messages, scrolling through updates, and occasionally binge-watching her favorite shows. Despite the online chaos she managed professionally, her own digital presence was carefully controlled, selective, private, and measured. Cari had a small circle of close friends who described her as thoughtful and observant. She remembered birthdays, checked in when someone seemed down, and had a way of making people feel seen. Yet underneath her calm exterior, there were subtle hints of worry. For weeks before her disappearance, she had mentioned receiving messages from unknown accounts. At first, she laughed them off, thinking it was just spam or pranks. But gradually, the tone of the messages became alarming, persistent, probing, and occasionally threatening. They seemed to track her movements, commenting on her routines in ways that suggested the sender knew more than they should. March 18th, 2022, began like any other day. Cari completed her morning run and went about her work. In the afternoon, she sent a few messages to a friend about meeting up later, nothing unusual on the surface. By evening, she hadn't returned home, and her roommates grew worried. They called her phone repeatedly, each time being redirected to voicemail. As hours passed and darkness fell over the neighborhood, concern turned to fear. When Cari still hadn't come back by late evening, her roommates dialed 911, reporting her as missing. Police arrived swiftly, entering Cari's apartment with quiet urgency. Inside, the scene was eerily normal. Her purse rested on the kitchen counter. Her keys lay neatly in a bowl by the door, and her laptop sat open on the dining table as if she had stepped away for a moment and would return any second. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no struggle. Every item in its place, every detail ordinary, except for the absence of Cari herself. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Investigators began examining her digital footprint. Her social media activity appeared normal until mid-afternoon, the last messages revealing fear and uncertainty. She had written about someone watching her, someone obsessively messaging her for weeks. The senders' identities were hidden behind layers of anonymity, multiple accounts that seemed to appear and disappear at random. It was clear to the detectives that this was not just a simple missing person case. This was the work of someone who had studied her, tracked her, and used the digital world to get close. What had started as routine online harassment had escalated into a chilling reality. Cari Farver's disappearance was a calculated act, and the answers lay somewhere in the messages she had received. The first real breakthrough in Cari Farver's case came from her phone. Investigators sent the device to digital forensics experts, who worked tirelessly to recover deleted messages and trace their origins. What they found was alarming. Hidden beneath ordinary texts were layers of aggressive, obsessive messages from multiple anonymous accounts. Each account seemed to have a different personality, some polite and curious at first, gradually escalating to threats and demands. One message stood out above the rest. It claimed to have seen everything, and insisted that Cari meet the sender in a public park, late in the afternoon, adding a sense of urgency that was impossible to ignore. The words themselves sent chills through the investigators. They weren't just harassment. They were a blueprint of someone trying to control her movements. The detectives noticed a pattern. Though the accounts were registered from different locations across the city, the content of the messages suggested knowledge of her daily routines, her friends, and even the smallest details of her apartment. There were references to things she had only mentioned in passing to co-workers or close friends. Whoever was behind this knew her well enough to track her movements, predict her behavior, and manipulate her. It was not random. It was personal. Police began methodically interviewing everyone in Cari's circle. Her co-workers at the marketing firm spoke of a bright, engaged colleague who had never shown signs of fear or anxiety in public. Friends recalled that she occasionally mentioned strange messages, but none had realized the danger they implied. Neighbors reported seeing her on her morning jogs and during small errands, but nothing suspicious that day. It was as if Cari had vanished from the physical world, leaving behind only a trail in cyberspace, a ghost in the digital ether that no one could touch. Then came the discovery that would shift the investigation into a new, more sinister direction. Cari's smartwatch. The GPS data revealed that on the day she disappeared, she had followed her usual morning routine, running along the neighborhood streets. Later, she had gone to a nearby coffee shop, an errand that would have seemed harmless. But she never returned home. The GPS trail stopped abruptly in a wooded area on the outskirts of town, a location far removed from her usual routes. Her phone briefly pinged from the same area, before going silent. It was clear that someone had lured her there, manipulating her through the very messages that had harassed her for weeks. As detectives pieced together the timeline, a disturbing theory began to emerge. Cari's disappearance was not impulsive or random. It had been carefully orchestrated. The messages, once thought to be mere digital threats, were the key. They were designed to shape her decisions, to guide her toward the secluded area where she vanished. Every message, every seemingly casual detail, had been a thread in a web that the unknown sender had spun around her. The investigators realized that the answers to her disappearance could only be found by following these digital clues, tracing the hidden patterns in the messages, and uncovering the identity of someone who had infiltrated her life in the most invasive and terrifying way imaginable. Detectives soon focused their attention on Victor Haynes, a former co-worker of Cari Farver. Victor had been let go from the marketing firm months earlier, officially for poor performance. But behind the scenes, he had been disciplined for harassing Cari online. After he was fired, Cari had blocked him on all social media accounts. But investigators discovered that Victor had created multiple anonymous profiles to continue messaging her. At first, the messages were passive, even apologetic. But over time, they became obsessive and threatening. Neighbors reported seeing a man matching Victor's description lingering near Cari's apartment at unusual hours, sometimes watching the building from across the street. The pattern of his behavior suggested more than casual curiosity. It suggested an unhealthy fixation. Police obtained a warrant to search Victor's home. Inside, they found a chilling collection of items that made the detectives' stomachs turn. Notebooks filled with meticulous observations about Cari's daily routines lined shelves. Each page contained notes on where she went, who she interacted with, and even what she wore on certain days. On the dining table sat dozens of phones, each loaded with different accounts that had been used to contact her. Pinned to the walls were printed screenshots of every conversation Victor had with Cari, along with maps, lists, and reminders, as if he were planning something with military precision. Despite the unsettling evidence of obsession, there was no direct proof linking Victor to Cari's disappearance. No DNA, no fingerprints, no traceable movements to the site where she had last been seen. The absence of concrete evidence frustrated investigators, leaving them to grapple with a man who seemed both dangerous and meticulous enough to leave no trace. As days passed, the case appeared to stall. The police followed every lead they could, interviewing neighbors, tracking online activity, and reviewing security camera footage. But Cari's location remained a mystery. Then, an anonymous tip arrived at the station. The caller claimed to know where Cari might be and gave a rough location, an abandoned cabin on the outskirts of town, far from the main roads. The area was isolated, surrounded by thick forest, and had no cell reception. The tip sounded like a gamble, but police had little choice but to investigate. They began combing surveillance footage from stores and gas stations near the area. One camera captured something chilling: a white van slowly driving past the cabin's direction several times over the past week. The vehicle matched the description of a van neighbors had noticed parked near Victor Haynes' home on multiple occasions. License plate records confirmed it belonged to him. The pieces began to fall into place. Victor had the motive, the obsession, and now, a potential location connected to a vehicle he controlled. The realization hit the investigators like a punch. The case was no longer about tracking an anonymous online stalker. It was about a man who may have orchestrated an entire disappearance. Every previous clue, the messages, the tracking, the surveillance, was starting to point towards something horrifying. Cari's fate now seemed directly linked to Victor and the cabin in the woods. Detectives knew that what awaited them could change the investigation forever, and the sense of dread in the room was palpable. The search that had begun online, through cryptic messages and digital trails, was about to enter the real world, and the consequences could be devastating. Inside the abandoned cabin, the air was thick with dust and decay. Authorities moved cautiously, knowing that any evidence could be fragile or contaminated. Scattered across the floor were Cari Farver's belongings: her backpack, a pair of worn sneakers, and her laptop, which was still open as if she had just stepped away. Nothing about the cabin looked like a typical hideout. It was small, poorly furnished, and almost hidden by overgrown brush, yet it held chilling clues about what had occurred inside. The laptop contained files Cari had been working on, including a draft of a message she never sent. In it, she detailed the fear that had been mounting over weeks: the messages, the anonymous accounts, the feeling that someone was watching her constantly. The tone was urgent and panicked, a silent cry for help that no one had received in time. Forensic teams began combing the cabin systematically. In one corner, partially hidden under a loose floorboard, they discovered a small hidden compartment. Opening it revealed the first undeniable signs of violence. Blood-stained clothing and personal items belonging to Cari were inside, alongside documents indicating that the cabin had been more than just a storage space. Among the papers were meticulous notes, diagrams of the local area, and schedules showing Victor Haynes had tracked Cari's movements for weeks. He had carefully planned every stage of her abduction, from luring her away from familiar areas to isolating her in the woods. The evidence transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide. It was clear now that Victor had intended to control every detail of Cari's life and her death. Victor was quickly arrested at his home, where officers also discovered more phones, notebooks, and recordings that reinforced the story the cabin had begun to tell. During interrogation, his account was convoluted and implausible. He insisted that Cari had wanted to leave town and that he had merely been protecting her from imagined threats. Yet the physical evidence, digital footprints, and eyewitness accounts all contradicted him. Every step, every message, every note pointed to a man obsessed with control, whose obsession had escalated into premeditated murder. Investigators faced a new challenge: reconstructing Cari's final hours. Her smartwatch, phone, and digital history provided fragmented clues. The messages she received on the day of her disappearance, when pieced together, showed a sinister strategy. Each account was designed to manipulate her movements, to isolate her from friends, and to drive her toward the cabin without arousing suspicion. The level of planning was staggering, revealing a chilling combination of patience, calculation, and obsession. The discovery of Cari's belongings and the hidden compartment brought a grim clarity. The case was no longer about searching for a missing woman. It was about understanding the mind of a killer and how digital stalking had translated into real-world violence. Each piece of evidence, each message, each note, each trace of her presence in that cabin, told a story of fear, entrapment, and ultimate tragedy. For detectives, the immediate priority was to map the timeline, to understand every step Victor had taken, and to ensure that no detail went unnoticed. The truth about Cari's final hours was buried in the digital traces, in the obsessive planning, and in the cabin itself, waiting to be fully uncovered. Forensic experts worked tirelessly to analyze every device recovered from Cari Farver's apartment and the abandoned cabin. Phones, laptops, smartwatches, and even backup drives were scrutinized for deleted texts, images, and audio recordings. Among the trove of data, one recording stood out, a chilling audio clip capturing the confrontation between Victor Haynes and Cari at the cabin. Her voice was strained and trembling, a mixture of fear and defiance. She pleaded, reasoned, and attempted to buy time, while Victor's tone revealed his cold, calculated obsession. The recording offered a rare and haunting insight into the final moments of her life. Investigators pieced together the digital breadcrumbs Cari had left behind. Deleted messages recovered from multiple accounts showed how Victor had methodically manipulated her movements. GPS data from her smartwatch and phone revealed the routes she had taken, which Victor had tracked meticulously. Each message, time-stamped and correlated with her location, created a precise timeline of her abduction. This combination of digital evidence allowed law enforcement to reconstruct the sequence of events in extraordinary detail. For the first time, they could see the methodical escalation from harassment to stalking to lethal violence, all orchestrated from behind a screen. During the trial, prosecutors emphasized the role of these digital footprints. Screenshots, recovered messages, and GPS logs were presented as a timeline of obsession and premeditation. Experts testified about the increasingly aggressive nature of Victor's messages, highlighting how each interaction had been designed to control and terrorize Cari. The jury was shown the extent of his planning, the multiple accounts, the secretive GPS tracking, and the meticulous notebooks documenting every detail of her life. It became clear that this was not a crime of impulse, but a meticulously executed plan rooted in obsession. The courtroom was tense as the audio recording of Cari's final confrontation was played. Her courage and resilience shone through even in fear, leaving the jury and attendees with a profound sense of the horror she had endured. The recording, alongside the digital and physical evidence, left no doubt that Victor Haynes had lured Cari under false pretenses, held her captive, and ultimately ended her life. Experts explained how his obsession escalated in stages, showing a chilling progression from harassment to murder. The prosecution framed the story in a way that made the jury see the entire chain of events as a deliberate, premeditated act, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. The jury deliberated for only 2 days before returning a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Victor Haynes was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The decision brought a measure of closure to Cari's family, friends, and the wider community, though the pain of her loss remained. Cari Farver's case became a stark warning about the dangers of online harassment and the real-world consequences of digital obsession. Her story highlighted the dark side of seemingly innocent online interactions and the importance of vigilance in the digital age. The very messages that once threatened her life became crucial in revealing the truth and ensuring justice. In the quiet town of Oregon, the tragedy left a lasting mark, reminding everyone that behind every screen there can be unseen dangers, and that careful investigation and persistence can turn digital trails into justice.